Environment Committee for October 5th. And City Hall is open to the public during the COVID emergency with reduced capacity and physical distancing requirements. Meetings can also be viewed via live streaming on YouTube and the city website. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact pec@london.ca. With that, I will look to committee to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, I am going to do a little bit of a change in the order here because we have members of the public that are looking to possibly speak to the only scheduled item today, which is a public participation meeting regarding an application at 101 Meadow Lily Road South. So I'm going to put that one first up, and I will look for a motion to open the public participation meeting. I moved by Deputy Mayor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Hopkins, and I'll call that vote. Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
And Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So we had a letter arrive that is on the added agenda, and it is a letter from the consultant for the applicant requesting that we consider deferring this matter. So I'm going to go to city staff first to have a brief introduction and to talk about this last minute request change.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you want me to go through a presentation first, or do you want me to go through the deferral first and the request?
Go through the deferral first. Thanks, Mr.
Okay.
Corby.
Sure. So what happened as a result of our zoning bylaw that we were recommending, we recommended a 2.5-story height limit, which is in keeping with the London Plan and neighborhood place policies. The applicant had identified through the renderings actually 3 stories in the townhomes along Meadow Lily. So as a result of this reduction in height, they have to go back and look at a different form of development potentially, which could affect their building footprint, which then could affect their site plan. So they want to make sure, A, that they're representing exactly what they're showing to the public is accurate at a future meeting. And hopefully they can address some additional concerns by deferring this with the public. And like I said, they just want to make sure they're transparent moving forward. And that's why they're seeking the deferral.
So I'll go to committee first to see if there are any technical questions about this deferral possibility. Councillor Turner.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think my question would just be procedurally, what's the best way to address this issue? Given that we've opened the public participation meeting, we do have people here to speak to it. I guess we also, 1, have to determine whether we grant the deferral, and 2, determine to hear the public, and 3rd, whether we hear the whole presentation with respect to the application, and if we have to make any decisions on that application, or if it's just a question of deferral or not at this point. Perhaps I could ask that through you to staff.
Yeah, Mr. Corby, I don't know if you would answer that or somebody else. Hold on 1 second. The city clerk is going to give us some answers here too.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to answer from a procedural perspective only, of course. Generally, if the deferral is considered and granted, because the public participation meeting was advertised, generally we would still give the public an option to speak, acknowledging, however, that it appears that there would be a change to the development proposal, and there would be another public participation meeting. So some of the comments from the public may change based on what is coming forward.
Any follow-up on that, Councillor Turner, before I go to Mr. Corby?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. It sounds appropriate. I think it would be appropriate that we have people here to hear from them. I think it might help inform the next phase if the applicant is taking this back. Having heard the public submissions, they'll have the opportunity to hear those, and that can be taken back. I think the next part is how we properly dispose of the item, and whether we're just move to defer or refer back to staff, I guess, would probably be the most appropriate. But yeah, I just wanted to clear up the procedural stuff before we started moving forward, and perhaps we hear more from Mr. Corby.
Okay, Mr. Corby?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think just reiterating what the city clerk said, since the members of the public are here, I feel like that is the best way to proceed and listen to the concern, acknowledging that the plan may change, but they can address those concerns at a later public meeting. I think from my standpoint, I'm happy to give the presentation first, and then we can go into the public comments, and then you can decide how to deal with the matter after that.
So committee, I'm looking to you. I'll go to, I see Councillor Van Hulst is visiting and he's got his hand up. I'll go to you in a bit, Councillor. I'm going to go to Councillor Hopkins first. So we do have the option of having Mr. Corby give us a presentation on the application that's on the agenda, knowing that that application could change and we don't really know how much it could change at this point. So I'll go to Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I would be prepared to receive the presentation from staff. We do have members in our committee rooms. I think we do need to hear from them. And then we can also make a decision on the referral after that. I would think it would be helpful to the process just to have this engagement and this conversation, knowing and the community understands that this is not what it may look like moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll go to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much, Chair. Look, the public is here and they always ever supported their appropriate right to make comments. I'm not sure it's as helpful to hear from the staff report because you're going to have, perhaps in part, the public trying to respond to the staff report, which frankly may not well be the staff report, and I suspect it won't be, assuming that the referral goes through. So all that said, I'm happy to hear from the public and defer the staff report until until again, presuming it's referred back, approved by council to do that we then get one set of facts that we're dealing with, as opposed to hearing things that may not be the case, that either may bias, and even if it doesn't, frankly, here's my concern. I'd probably talk more about it than the time it would take to give the report, but that would be my view, is that we defer that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Van Hulst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd be pleased to hear the staff report. I think it might help us understand the changes that will have taken place. And I'm also very happy to hear from the public on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So from committee, we have one member indicating that they would like to have a presentation, one member indicating that they would not. What if I ask Mr. Corby, I believe he had a somewhat substantial presentation prepared. We have the slides in our agenda packet. What if I go to Mr. Corby and just have say a 2-minute introduction to this proposal And knowing that it could change, I don't suspect it will be a substantive change, but I'll go to Deputy Mayor Helmer.
I think we're in danger of spending way more time talking about the order of operations than we are in hearing the staff report. So I think we should just go ahead with the full staff report. We're going to get another report when there's a different proposal. And that's what happens at Planning Committee. We're going to have 2 PPMs.
Absolutely, knowing we are going to go ahead with 2 public participation meetings. I'd say the majority now has voted in favor of a full staff presentation, and knowing that our presentations are anyway altered during this virtual environment, and we don't get the same full-blown slide presentation that we would normally get. I'll go to Mr. Corby without any further ado to give us his report verbally.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I don't want to speak on the applicant's behalf, but I think you're right. I don't think the changes will be too major. I believe they're going to look at redesigning the townhomes along Meadow Lily, but those 37 single detached dwellings will remain the same. So that's probably the extent of it. So in terms of the staff report and bylaw, there would likely be minor changes, if any, moving forward. On that. So I'll go into my presentation though. As you mentioned, I attached Appendix G, which had some slides on there. They're kind of for reference material as I speak through just the policy context and stuff like that. And just so you can see kind of the buffering that's been provided on the site. So I'll begin the presentation now. So as we talked about, the site's located at 101 Meadow Lily. This is in East London. It's located northeast of Highbury Ave South, where it crosses with Commissioners Road East. The site's located between Highbury Woods on the west side of the site, and then the Meadow Lily Woods ESA to the east of the site. In terms of the application itself, the application is for a zoning bylaw amendment and a vacant land condominium application. This would permit 89 total units through cluster residential development. 37 of those units will be single detached dwellings, while 13 of those are townhomes with 4 units per building. As a result of this application, the city has initiated an official plan amendment to change from the existing urban reserve community growth designation to low density residential designation. So in terms of policies, in regard to the London plan, the site is currently within a neighborhood place type. This runs along the west side of Meadow Lily, south to Commissioners Road. The proposed cluster residential development is in keeping with the permitted uses of the neighborhood place type along this local street. As mentioned, the site's within an urban reserve community growth designation in the 1989 plan. This designation is used generally as a placeholder, identifying that lands within this designation will be used for a mix of urban land uses in the future. This is why the city has initiated that change from the urban reserve to low density residential. We feel it's appropriate on a site-specific basis, and that low-density designation is in keeping with the neighborhood place type designation of the London plan. Through this process, there was public concern raised. The main points were based around traffic, parking, safety, impacts on the surrounding features, as well as the heritage character of the area. In terms of traffic, through the review process, it was determined that the proposed use will not generate significant levels of traffic and should not have adverse effects in the area. In regards to parking, there seems to be ongoing on-street parking issues. This is something we've addressed through the report, that they can reach out to our transportation department to see if there's any way to deal with those ongoing issues. Staff feel the vacant land condo provides sufficient parking for the residents and should not have adverse effects on Meadow Lily Road. In regards to safety, a sightline analysis was completed to help ensure safe sightlines are available along Meadow Lily Road. There's also the potential for the reduction in speed through a council-approved initiative, which is looking at reducing speeds on local roads throughout London. However, this will be in the future. In regards to the impacts on the surrounding features, staff feels appropriate buffering has been provided on the lands. We have a 35-meter buffer on the west side of the property from the drip line of the Highbury Woods. This actually results in a 45-meter setback from the westerly property line, as the drip line is about 10 meters onto the subject site. These lands within that area will be dedicated to the city and are to be zoned and designated for open space, protecting that buffer area. In terms of the east side of the property, we feel the existing right-of-way plus additional road widening and the required setbacks of the zoning bylaw provide significant buffering to the features on the east. Those buffers also relate to protecting the heritage character, and through the site plan approval process, staff will seek to implement the recommendations provided through the HIA in terms of maintaining that character of the area. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corby. Are there technical questions from committee for Mr. Corby? Deputy Mayor.
There's a couple of references in the public correspondence and the response from the applicant around the cultural heritage landscape. And I wonder if Mr. Corby could just clarify what the status of that is and speak to that directly.
Mr. Corby.
Sorry, Councillor Helmer, are you asking me to clarify what the cultural heritage of the area is? I'm just confused by the question, sorry.
No problem. So there's some references to the fact that the sort of the roadway itself, the lead into the park, was almost designated as a cultural heritage landscape. And I just wonder if you clarify what happened with that.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not aware what happened with that. I don't think our heritage planner is here to speak to the matter, but I'm not aware what happened to that. Sorry.
Deputy Mayor?
That's fine.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I know we're on technical questions, so maybe this is the time to ask the question that I had about the permanent pumping station. If staff could just give a few more details. I know it's mentioned here that the development can access water, and the proposed development can access sanitary servicing, which will be privately owned. If staff can just expand a little bit more on that.
Mr. Corby.
I'll take this one, Madam Chair. It's Matt Thalberg speaking. So what through the condominium, what we would do is we would create a common element pumping station, and that would be installed somewhere on the site as we work through the details of the design. And then what would happen is there would be a sewer that would be run up Meadow Lily Road to where the outlet is, and they would connect into the sewer at that point. They'd have to bring services. There's no water that actually connects down that far or that far north to this site. So they'll have to actually bring water service down Meadow Lily Road so that they can connect when the development proceeds.
Thank you for that. And the pumping station, would that be, who would be responsible for that?
And through you, Madam Chair, so the condominium would actually be responsible for that. They'd be required to operate and maintain that as per their common elements, and they'd be the residents would be paying a fee or their monthly fees into that. There'd be a reserve fund, and they would take care of the maintenance and ensure that it was operating correctly.
And would they also be responsible for any emergency or anything happening with the pumping station? Not the
and through you, Madam Chair, yes, they would. And then the connections themselves would be out in the, we'd be working with an operations agreement with our wastewater staff to ensure that it's operated correctly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll go to Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the province has said now that any home can have a secondary unit installed by right. And so my question through you to staff is if that had been considered in terms of the traffic and the utilities necessary for this area. There could be quite a large expansion of the population if all the homeowners took advantage of that opportunity.
Mr. Corby or Mr. Feldberg.
I'll take this one, Madam Chair. So that wasn't the application in front of us. The application was for vacant land condominium.
Thank you. Any other technical questions? So I will, oh, Councillor Lewis, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for recognizing me as a guest at your committee. I do have two questions for our staff in regard to the presentation that we just heard. The first was that no significant traffic impact was expected from this. I wonder, I mean, to me, if memory serves, there are fewer than 24 residences on this stretch of road already. So we're talking about quadrupling the traffic, and we're also talking about traffic that's going to be inside the 30-meter buffer zone of an ESA. So from an environmental perspective, has the traffic impact study taken into account the environmental impact of all of those extra vehicles inside an ESA buffer? That's my first question. And then my second question, so I'll just ask that so I can mute and hear the response, is that we just heard that it's the proposal is consistent with the character of the road. I'm just trying to square that circle in my head, because I look at the road and all of the setbacks are very significant, and they're all single family homes, and we're talking about a fairly intense 80+ unit development right now, understanding that that might change a little as the footprint is altered. But I'm not sure how to square that circle in terms of the comment that it's consistent with the character of the road. So I just wonder if the staff can provide a little more insight into those two issues.
Mr. Corby or Mr. Feldberg.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. So with respect to the traffic impact assessment, it doesn't take into account necessarily the buffer limits of an ESA. What it's looking at is a traffic count for a particular road to determine the loading of that road and whether the development is appropriate. So in this case, we have a local road, and we have certain capacities that are able to function on that street. And based on what we've seen thus far and the number of units that are being proposed, we feel it's appropriate at this time. As far as the second question, perhaps Mr. Corby could address that one.
Thanks. Mr. Corby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So in regards to kind of maintaining the character in the area, as you mentioned, there's about 5 or 6 single-family dwellings south of this property that all have fairly significant setbacks from the road. And in terms of meeting that character, this development as well will be set back fairly significantly. They are required to give us about 3 to 5 meters, depending where it is located on the property of road widening dedication. And then on top of that, they're providing another 11-meter setback for those townhomes. And as mentioned, through site plan, they'll be able to use landscaping. There's recommendations of using native trees or gates to help create that heritage character through this development.
All right. Any other technical questions? So I wonder if the applicant is here and if the applicant would like to address the committee. Okay, just come to the microphone, state your name, and you will have 5 minutes.
Good now? Yeah, go ahead. Hi, my name is Jason Johnson. I'm with Dillon Consulting, representing the applicant. Based on what you've heard, we have received some comments from the city and the public in the last week, and so that's why the deferral was requested. As a result, the plans originally presented will be modified, specifically the townhome blocks or units, which will require an additional public meeting to provide the public and the committee with a chance to comment on the new layout. The information that has been provided tonight will not change regarding the applicable policies and the justification provided in the planning justification report. All modifications will be regarding the townhome blocks and the zoning provisions regarding them. As you've heard from Mike Corby's report, the proposed development consists of the following: a mix of single detached dwellings and townhome units, private sanitary sewers and storm sewers, including a private sanitary pump station and force main, a private public water main, buffers from the Highbury Woods Park and the Meadow Lily ESA in accordance with provincial and municipal requirements, and landscaping and heritage compensation features complementary to the natural existing landscape. As noted earlier, the application that's submitted to amend the city bylaw is from a holding urban reserve to a site-specific residential R6 zone that would permit the development of single detached, semi-detached, and townhome dwellings with the following provisions. And that was provided in the report. The proposed zoning provisions for the single detached will remain the same. And then, as I said, noted before, it should be noted that with the change in the layout to the townhome units within the development, the zoning provisions may be modified from the ones originally requested. If anything, the setbacks will increase, providing additional buffering and landscaped areas. Based on the provincial policy statement, the proposed development will meet the intent of the policies in the provincial policy statement by providing additional multi-price point housing units with a range and mix of housing types and tenures that will be connected to existing infrastructure located in the vicinity of the development. The proposed private housing development is consistent with these policies by encouraging the use of underutilized lands, by proposing a land use that can exist in harmony with the surrounding land uses, and by creating opportunities for increased municipal taxes. Located near commercial uses, parks, and schools, as well as along transit routes, the proposed development will also provide opportunities for residents of all abilities to access other areas for the City of London. The proposed development observes the existing ESA boundary and provides a significant size buffer to allow for the protection enhancement of Highbury Woods and the Meadow Lily Woods ESA surrounding the property. This allows for the redevelopment of the already residential land for a mix of housing types. Just based on the London plan, the subject site is located within the urban growth boundary for the City of London and is designated neighborhoods place type, which permits a mix of residential uses on the site as proposed. The proposed development will consist of low-rise, low-coverage buildings that minimize problems of shadowing, view obstruction, and loss of privacy. The applicant is requesting an amendment to the City of London zoning bylaw Z1 for a site-specific residential R6 zone that would permit the proposed dwellings with the site-specific setbacks and lot coverage provisions. The required parking for this type of development would be a minimum of 2 spaces for the single detached and townhouse units. All lots or units will be able to support at least the required 2 spaces, with most being able to provide more. A minimum of 10 additional proposed visitor parking spaces for the townhome blocks will also be provided. Further details will be provided upon the completion of the revised zoning bylaw amendment, site plan, and draft plan submissions.
You have about 30 seconds left.
Okay, so sounds good. So just quickly to summarize the key benefits and features. So the proposed development is significantly scaled down, 89 units plus or minus, compared to a maximum allowed density of more than 250 units. Generous front yard setbacks compared to the minimum required for units facing Meadow Lily Road South. There's generous buffers provided as part of the development to protect Highbury Woods and the Meadow Lily ESA. Approximately 430 meters of new public multi-use pathway will be created by the city within the generous buffers provided as part of the development. More trees and plants are to be planted than what would be removed during construction.
Okay, Mr. Johnson, you're past your 5 minutes. And knowing that we will be going through this again, when the application comes back to us, you'll have an opportunity to speak again at that time. So what I'm going to do now is go to committee room 1 and 2, where I see there are a number of members of the public present. And if anybody would like to address the committee, there's a microphone in the room. You can come to the microphone, and you'll each have 5 minutes. Come to the microphone, state your name, and you'll have 5 minutes.
My name is Gary Smith. I live at 141 Meadow Lily Road South. I'm a member of the Friends of Meadow Lily Woods Community Association. I'd like to address a few key items with regard to how it is our residents and our community feel about this proposal. First of all, I got to get some reassurance with regard to the fact that with regard to this deferral, that it be stated definitely that if the deferral is allowed, that the public process around this and everything be deferred, and we get opportunity for another public meeting when that deferral comes. That's the first concern. Our next concern is our members and our residents would like to know what the wording is for that meeting with regard to making sure that correspondences and communications that are sent to the planner and to the clerks be attached to the agenda and not necessarily relegated to the staff report. I'd like to know what that wording is. And thirdly, while it is the case, sorry about my breath, that we have strived to find some way to be cooperative and a part of the overall discussion with this, that would not be a matter that just because we want to defend our neighborhood, our community, and our natural area, that we necessarily mean to be uncooperative or aggressive in any way. In terms of further remarks, I have some concerns about the definition of buffers and setbacks in this particular application with regard to 2 important issues, if not 3. Number 1 is that the existing conditions on Meadow Lily Road South are such that most of the houses and most of the areas along our road have setbacks of somewhere between 21 to 60 meters off the road. The presentation by Mr. Corby suggests that the fewest buffer with regard to this particular setback and buffer is somewhere between 3 and 5 meters. We consider that unacceptable, that these structures are too close to the road. Number 2. No. I was distracted. That's the first issue with regard to those buffers. And the buffer on the back of the property isn't the issue. The buffer is between the most front buildings on this proposal and the edge of Meadow Lily Road South on the west. That's the objection. Number 2, there is the issue of the setbacks and buffers with regard to protection of the ecological and environmental features of Meadow Lily ESA, especially as it borders on the east boundary of Meadow Lily Road South, as that was the original part of the ESA that was given to the city of the Fraser family in 1991. As far as how I understand the setbacks and buffers policy of the city, as was given to me by Mr. Corby and other people, that those buffers would in fact overhang or exceed the width of the road with regard to where the situation is right now, and that numerous policies, both provincial and also municipal, suggest that infrastructure not be installed or put in areas of such an important buffer. The Third piece is that not only is the ESA there, but there is also the matter that there's a water course and a creek, not just on the west side of this property, but also on the east side of this property that comes off of Park Farm and goes all the way down to the river on the east side of the road. And that too would suggest that there would be a buffer that would not only go a considerable length towards the other side of the road, as well as the fact that the trees along the ESA also overhang at numerous points the east side of the road, and their 10-meter buffer would also be on the other side, the west side of Meadow Lily Road South. So we object. Appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And the questions that you asked at the beginning, we will get to those when the public participation meeting is finished. Then staff will answer all of the questions that are raised. Is there anybody else that would like to address the committee in committee room 1 or 2 or 3?
Hi, my name is Bruce Richardson. I live at 25 Meadow Lily Road South. The only concern that we have is there is mention of ESA and setbacks, and there is mention of the Highbury Woods setbacks, and there is no mention whatsoever of the Meadow Lily Nature Preserve, which is directly to the north of 101 Meadow Lily. And we asked why, or if it could be included. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Any other members of the public that would like to speak?
I'm actually just Carol Richardson. Perfect, thank you. Carol Richardson. My address is 1200 Riverside Drive. I'm a member of the Friends of Meadow Lily Woods and donor of the Meadow Lily Nature Preserve. My husband and I donated that to the City of London. My question basically is this: when I heard that they have gone for only 89 units, when you could have gone for more, I understand right now it's urban reserve, and maybe the planning people could answer this. If it's urban reserve and it's rezoned, they're asking for an R6, which I think allows a very high density. Are there any other options in rezoning? For instance, can it be R2, or I just don't understand the zoning situation. And so will our councillors have any option to R6 when they finally vote? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson. Anybody else care to speak to the Planning Committee?
My name is Susan Smith. I live at 141 Meadow Lily Road South. I have lived at that house I am a 19-year resident of Meadow Lily Road. I moved to this area because of its natural features. This area gives us space to live, enjoy its beauty. This area of Meadow Lily is a gem in Southeast London, although I've heard some people say that they wanted to live here as part of this process. And I agree that the people are entitled to live in this area, but the reason they want to live here is because of its natural beauty. The water features, the trees, the plants, the birds, the deer, the wide open spaces. If we put this development there, like it's being taken away. Their reason for wanting to be in this area doesn't make sense if they're going to build all these houses. My shirt says, preserve the integrity of Meadow Lily Road South. Keep it green. The back, growing responsibly, environmentally, and now, I do not want this large development in my neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Anyone else care to speak to the committee?
Hello, my name is Andrew Stellarski. My mother lives on 147 Meadow Lily Road South. We've lived there almost 50 years. I knew the Fraser family, the Kemps, everybody that was in that area originally. And Mr. Fraser gave us a gift. He gave the city a beautiful gift, and which is so important, not just to the city, but to visitors, that we can maintain a forest city and preserve it in ways that we can embrace and touch our past at the same time as grow in appropriate areas. My question is, can urban reserves still be designated as a green space and kept as a green space? That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Any other members of the public? I see someone in committee room 3. If you would care to state your name, sir, and then you'll have 5 minutes.
Yes, Dennis Weir. I'm here today to speak against this proposal. I would urge council to deny the application totally. It is very much inappropriate. It's one of the few beautiful historic areas in the city of London. And this would be a travesty if this development was allowed to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weir. Did I see someone in number 5 ready to come? Okay, there we are, committee room 5. State your name, 5 minutes.
Okay, my name's Ron Hicks. I live in London for 35 years now. We, my wife and I, especially in COVID, have done a lot of walking around the different parks in the city. We discovered Meadow Lily this year, although we've heard about it before. And right now it's one of our go-to places. It's just a breath of fresh air in there. As somebody else mentioned, it's the wildlife, it's the river running through it. Even when we first went down there, we saw the Meadow Lily bee farm. And I think he was saying, I don't quote me, but if this whole development goes in, that's going to destroy a lot of that. It's going to have all this machinery going on and things like that. I think it's just way too big for that particular area. The thing that's gotten me lately is in London, there seems to be a lot of development, and I'm not against development, but I'm against development that takes up valuable ecological space. And I feel Meadow Lily is one of those. There's other areas around. We go to Dorchester Ponds as well, but it's just a personal feeling. I don't have a lot of facts about it, but it's someplace that we enjoy, and I know a lot of people that we see on the trail enjoy it as well. I just don't see, I asked the committee to really think about before they accept this application. It sounds reasonable in some ways now, but I think in the future, just like out in Southdale Road past Wonderland, it's growing so huge now that is just unbelievable. We first moved out there, there's nothing but farmland. So just to get a good consideration, I know the public would appreciate it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hicks. Any other members? Okay, I see you, in committee room 3. Go ahead, state your name.
Hi there, it is Kelly McKeating. I live at 329 Victoria Street, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario. This development proposal, in my view, is the antithesis of the London plan's desire to build inward and upward. Meadow Lily Road is an idyllic little country laneway that has not changed substantially since the farmhouses on that street were first built almost 200 years ago. As other people have mentioned, there is ESA and nature preserve land on 3 sides of the proposed development. And also there's a designated property, Park Farm, on the southeast, adjacent to the property on the southeast corner. With respect to Mr. Corby's comments, I think like most members of the public, we're only seeing a proposed buffer on two sides, on the north and on the west. And I think that arguably a buffer on the east side is at least as important, both for the ESA and for Park Farm. And driveways and front lawns, in my world, they're not buffers. What we would propose is that the development be required to have a significantly larger setback from Meadow Lily Road, and that there be a single access road rather than driveways for 52 townhouse units directly onto Meadow Lily Road. One of the things that I noticed as I was plowing through the 93-page planning report was the comments from the Transportation Department about sight lines. And it appeared to be saying that trimming and removing of trees from the ESA was going to be required in order to allow the 273 people who would live in this development to access their homes safely. One thing that it concerns me that that's not really well thought through, because to just blithely say, we got to cut some trees down, I just don't think that that should ever be done lightly, particularly not in a protected area like this. And one thing that I fear is that after these 273 people are living in this subdivision, they will start to understand how tiny the laneway is that is Meadow Lily Road. They'll start to realize how narrow and difficult to navigate it is in the wintertime. And they're going to be lobbying to have it widened and made more car friendly. And that pressure, if it succeeds, could irreversibly alter the character of the neighborhood in a way that I don't think anyone who lives there wants. The ACO's recommendations are, again, to have a significant buffer on the east side of the property that involves native trees, like real forests, so that the homes are not visible or very visible from the road, a single access road off of Meadow Lily Road, and a design for the townhomes and the single family homes that is more in keeping with the rural character of the area. It seems to me that the comments of the heritage planners that are in the planning report dated May 5, their comments are, it's not clear to me that their suggestions or the recommendations of Mr. Dingman in the heritage impact assessment have been addressed. And to close, I have one small question is, it doesn't appear that Latch has been involved in this and was not asked to provide comments. And I'm curious about why that didn't happen. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. McKeating. Any other members of the public who would like to speak? Oh, there you are. Go ahead. State your name in 5 minutes.
I'm Erika Boody. I'm also a resident of the City of London and I'm also here to speak against the proposal. I'm a mother of 3, an environmentalist, and I'm also completing my master's currently at Western in sustainability. And I agree entirely that this is a terrible idea. I know that it's an emotional topic for some. The avid trail users that use this area are not being taken into account. 24 residents? What about all the people that use these trails on a daily basis? I bring my children hiking there every day. They're learning about the natural world in their area, in their hometown. If we continue to build more homes in this area, it is going to affect the biodiversity in this area. I'm sorry to be a little bit emotional, but like, this place is close to my heart as it is to many residents of London. I was just there last weekend and it was happening. Not last weekend, the weekend before. It was unbelievable, the amount of cars and the amount of people that were using the trail. If we continue to develop, The exact area, I don't know how many of you people, how many of the people sitting on this committee have ever used this trail and appreciated its natural beauty, but there is plenty of wildlife and large animals, mammals, coyote, deer that regularly frequent the exact place where they want to build. So in keeping with the City of London's climate action plan, which should be more ambitious, we're looking, in comparison with other cities, the city of Vancouver, they want to be known as the greenest city. We want to be known as the forest city. If we want to be the forest city, we have to keep our forests with trees, forested. We can't just replant trees. These are mature trees. Planting new trees is not going to have the same impact. I'm just going to go to the city of website. I'm going to use this time because this is important. And I urge all of you sitting here today to go for a hike at Meadow Lily. I'm not kidding. This is really important. Before we're going to start ruining habitats and putting in new homes, you guys need to know what you're agreeing to. Listen, examples of topics under review include Thames River and flood impacts on infrastructure. This area is right along the water. It's on a hill. If you guys are familiar with this land, to get to Meadow Lily, like this lady was saying, you have to drive downhill. In the winter, I'm a trail runner, and I have to park at the top because the road is that dangerous to drive down in the winter months when it snows. Okay, so the Thames River, that's a huge part of the climate action plan the City of London is claiming to care about. Energy and greenhouse gas emissions. These trees, this area needs to be protected. I implore with all of you today to seriously consider this. Slope stability study, emergency management preparations. Do the future residents of this development know they're going to be responsible for the cost that they were saying that they're going to have to be held responsible for emergency storm sewer operation costs? I mean, there's so many things I could go on, and I don't want to waste everybody's time because I know that this meeting is probably going longer than already expected. But please, for homework, all of you go for a hike in there and then come back with your decision. Please. The climate action plan is a real scenario that needs to be worked on yesterday. We're already late, and we should be a leader. The forest city should be a leader for all of Canada. And if we do that development, it's shameful. I want to live there too. I love that area. I love that area with all my heart. But if we continue putting homes there, that area is not going to be anything to love. It's time to not only mitigate climate change, adaptation. We need to not only not ruin more green spaces, we need to plant more green spaces in the city. There are so many wonderful places all over this city that could use development. This area is not one of them. Thank you for your time.
Okay, is there anybody else who would like to address the committee? I'll ask one more time, in any of the committee rooms, do we have members of the public who would like to speak before we close the public participation portion of this meeting? All right. I'm not seeing anyone. I have one last comment. The city clerk is going to read a comment that was received by a member of the public who is quite ill and could not attend the meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is from Nancy Toski of 1017 Western Road. I want to thank staff and the developer for making several adjustments in keeping with heritage requirements. For example, sympathetic gates, setbacks of townhouses facing Meadow Lily Road, lighting that controls and prevents lighting bleed and glare from Park Farm. I do have two further requests, however, which seem to be crucial in preserving something of the character of Meadow Lily Road and view from Park Farm that plays an essential role in defining its character. CHIA. 1, deeper screening between Meadow Lily Road and the development, especially with driveways leading onto Meadow Lily Road and proposed boulevard plantings will not be adequate. 2, a public participation meeting to discuss proposed building design within the development. As the HIA points out, The models shown in the tentative proposal are too urban and sharp-edged for their natural and heritage-related context. We look forward to more appropriate designs.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And if you are in communication with Ms. Toski, please give our regards and hope that she has a quick recovery. So I'll look for a motion from committee to close the public participation meeting, moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Councillor Kayabaga. Thank you. And I will call that vote. Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So I'll go to city staff. I took note of about 7 questions that were asked, and I'll go through them all if you're taking notes, Mr. Corby or Mr. Feldberg. So the first one was, and I believe this was addressed, will there be another public meeting? And the answer that we heard at the beginning of the meeting was yes, there will be another public participation meeting when we have the final application of, with the final design. So the next question is about the reports. I'll actually go to the city clerk because I know she was involved in that. There was a question about the reports and whether they make it in front of the committee or are just relegated, was the term used, to the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the planning processes, the planners seek input from the public through 2 different streams. The first is the pre-application process, where they ask for applications when the notice of application is given. And then again, we seek public comments again through the public participation meeting notice, which those communications come to both the clerk's office and the planner. The general and process that we would follow is all of those comments from the public are included in the planner staff report, which is the case in this situation, where the emails and information from the public are contained in full as an appendice to the staff report. Anything that is received after the staff report is submitted to the city clerk's office for the agenda is then placed as a communication on the agenda itself. So everything that has been received up until 9 a.m. on Friday, which was the added agenda deadline for this meeting, are contained either as communications listed on the agenda or are contained in the staff report, which is also included on the agenda. So all of that communication is on the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And I would add that any communication, if you would want to ensure that is seen directly by any member of the committee, you can send an email directly to any member of the planning committee. You can also send an email to councillors@london.ca, and that will make its way to every member of council. So there are a number of ways to communicate. Did I get the email address wrong?
Actually, if you send it to the clerk's office through PAC, we will forward them to the councillors. And I meant to add also that between this meeting and council meeting up until 9 a.m. on Wednesday, if other communications come in, and we have received some, they will be placed on the council agenda.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So there are quite a variety of ways to make sure your communication is seen by the members of the Planning Committee and by all members of council. So the next question that I have noted here is, was the Meadow Lily Nature Preserve, why was it not included as one of the areas to be considered during the application? The next question was, if land is currently zoned urban reserve, can it be rezoned to any zone, or would we only, can this particular land only be rezoned to R6, or would we consider any other zone? Can an urban reserve designation be redesignated as open space or green space? Why are we allowing the applicant to trim trees within the ESA? That was a question. And why has the London Advisory Committee on Heritage, or was the Latch consulted? And if Latch was not consulted for this application, why not? So I'll go to you, Mr. Corby, and or Mr. Feldberg to answer any of those questions.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll try to remember them all and go through them. Maybe I'm already figured them, sorry. Let's start with the nature preserve one. I don't think they were left out for any reason. They're about 150 meters north of this site. So it is, substantially buffered. They are zoned and designated for open space. So in terms of direct impacts from this development, I think we felt they were minimal. I'm not sure exactly what he was referring to, why it wasn't considered. I mean, it was looked at with the surrounding area, but it's not directly abutting, and we didn't feel there were direct impacts from the development on the property. So that's why there was no mention in the report.
Urban reserve zone, they're asking to rezone it to R6. Can it be rezoned to any other type of zone?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, it can be zoned to a different zone, but the application was for the R6. If council wishes us to look at alternative zones, we can. But the applicant is seeking a specific form of development called a clustered residential development. Generally, that's through the R5 zone or the R6 zone. The R6 zone allows them the single detached dwellings. So it's really the only zone they can use to implement the proposed use at this time. And then I guess
Sorry, go ahead.
We can answer the question about the designation, changing it from urban reserve to open space. That is a viable option. Again, the application is not to change it. There would have to be an application brought forward to change from urban reserve to open space. We are changing the west half of the property to open space through this proposal. That's the recommendation. So it is an option. Again, council could seek to designate more, but that's not the application in front of us right now.
Through you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Yeoman. I saw you popped up on my screen. Go ahead.
If I could provide some further clarification on the designation piece. So in the 89 official plan, as Mr. Corby had indicated, these lands are designated urban reserve community growth, which meant they went through a comprehensive high-level planning exercise at some point in the past, which designated lands that would be reviewed further in the future. The London plan has designated the lands as a neighborhood place type, so they've gone through a comprehensive process for that to identify them for urban uses. For natural heritage and environmental areas, what we do is we do high-level environmental studies to place lands into an environmental reserve designation. From there, they are further reviewed for appropriateness of urban development and buffers and things like that. With this application, what we've done is we've completed an environmental impact environmental impact study that has reviewed the abutting features to determine appropriateness for development, but the lands are designated for urban related uses, not for natural heritage uses, other than those that we're recommending to be designated for those natural heritage uses.
Thank you, Mr. Yeoman. So, Mr. Corby, the next question was about trimming trees in the ESA. One member of the public is wondering if the applicant is being allowed to trim trees within the environmental significant area.
Through you, Madam Chair. So the recommendation from that site analysis would be for city staff to work with forestry, transportation, and city's forestry department would work together, looking at trimming trees likely within the city right-of-way to make these sight lines safe. So it wouldn't be the applicant just undertaking the cutting, it would be city staff working together to make sure, obviously, that we're not cutting or significant trees down and doing the appropriate trimming to make it safe.
Thank you. And has the latch been consulted? And if not, why not?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So at the start of this application was right at the start of COVID. During, I don't know how many months, but the standing committees weren't meeting. I don't think any of them are meeting still except for latch. So they did not review the application at the start. If the matter is deferred though, we can make sure latch is circulated on this next circulation.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Corby. And the clerk is nodding her agreement that the advisory committees have not been meeting, but latch is the only one that's been meeting recently. So that's great. With this deferral, you will be able to consult with them. So I will go to members of the committee. Perhaps somebody has questions that they heard that I missed, or if you have questions or comments to make, keeping in mind that there's a possibility we will defer this, so we could be having this conversation again. Councillor Turner, and then Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to explore a little bit more about the question of the buffer zone around the limits of an ESA. We have the environmental management guidelines updates as another item for us to discuss today. But we do have the EMGs that are in place currently, and they do talk to buffers and the amount of distance that needs to be between an ESA and any development. Notwithstanding that, there's a road, a Meadow Lily Road, that runs along the western perimeter of the ESA on the Meadow Lily side, on the Meadow Lily Woods side. How does that interplay with the development on the other side of the road, on the western side of the road, where the ESA is on the eastern side, and what considerations do we have to consider? And the reason I raise this, I'm not to argue arguments that we'll be discussing next time this comes forward, but if this is being referred back, I think it's a fair area for discussion. So that's clearly delineated now.
You're right. Thanks, Councillor. I'll go to staff for that.
James McKay, Colleges here through you, Madam Chair. With regards to buffers on the east side, as you say, there's already existing permanent impact there, the Meadow Lily Road. So it's a difficult position to require a buffer when there's already a high level impact already associated along that feature. And so we don't look to require additional buffer in that area. And they did provide good buffers from the other natural heritage feature components on the west side. So that's why we were satisfied with what was presented.
Through you, Madam Chair, in other circumstances, there are some fairly high impactful things where infrastructure does exist within the buffers of an ESA. I'm thinking like trunk sewers and swim ponds and stuff like that. Is a road any different, I guess, is the question of that.
Through Madam Chair, no, it still has the same kind of impact. There's a lot of historic, obviously, infrastructure that goes through these natural areas. We do look to when there's a new road being placed down to avoid these types of situations. I would point to Bradley Avenue EA, for example, where the road was aligned to stay outside of a designated buffer. That's not the case here. This is an existing impact, and so we have to work with that and look at whether or not adding an additional buffer adjacent to the road would provide any additional benefit. In this case, it's not likely that would do that in this case, given the road position.
Fair enough. Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, perhaps to Mr. Yeoman. Can you talk to us a little bit more, it might be Mr. Felberg too, I'm not sure, with respect to the private pumping station. This seems a little anomalous. It's a major piece of infrastructure, and Councillor Hopkins asked about it a little bit earlier about responsibility for this and how we can we can have assurances that it's maintained to a specific engineering standard that we would have for pumping stations under the City of London's realm, and then also how this interplays with orderly development and how that it seems to be a little leapfrog because supportive infrastructure has to be extended in order to be able to allow this development to proceed, whereas other developments and subdivisions would typically have that infrastructure in place before it was allowed to go forward.
Certainly, and through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Yom can probably fill in on some of the comments around infrastructure timing and orderly development. But with this particular one, my understanding, because we're looking at that, we have an urban reserve community growth. These lands were designated for growth at some time. So bringing forward an application where they would be responsible for the infrastructure. So putting in that pumping station. And then what we would do is we would tie that to a condominium common element. And then as we have in some other situations around the city where we have these private pump stations, there'd be an agreement with our wastewater operations folks where they would, the proponent would be required to maintain a certain level of service and ensure that they're not impacting our system.
And through you, Madam Chair, how is that monitored?
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. So within that agreement that we have, we would have certain monitoring conditions. We'd have certain maintenance and operations parameters that would need to be met. Could be not that we're expecting high strength, but if there was, say, a high strength use out here, we would have certain provisions to ensure that they were addressing the effluent discharge before it actually made it into the public side sewer. So little elements like that would be covered through that private agreement.
And the final question, if I might, on that, having it then as private infrastructure, I'd imagine then subsequent development couldn't necessarily tie into it, or could they?
And thank you through you, Madam Chair. So it will depend on the nature of that agreement. In some cases, we do have a few of those private pump stations where folks can tie into that. So we'd have to address that in that agreement with the proponent or the developer.
I see Mr. Yeoman's hand up. Go ahead, Mr. Yeoman.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm happy to speak to the orderly development question the councillor had. So what I can confirm is that the major infrastructure for this site is in place with trunk sanitary sewers on Commissioners Road. So it's not uncommon to have development that then has to make its local connections to the trunk infrastructure. We don't have anything identified specifically in the DC study for this. This area was reviewed as part of the DC study and it didn't trigger any defined infrastructure. If, however, there was deemed to be sewers that were wide enough to accommodate further development, they could be eligible for cost sharing through the development charges process.
Thank you. So just quick comments on it. We'll be hearing this again. Some comments we heard from the public. This is identified as lands that are urban reserve and it's identified for low density. The landowners have the right of development at that minimum amount. The question of whether it could be developed at a higher use would be left to us, but we couldn't down zone something. It becomes really dangerous for us to wade into that area. As Mr. Yeoman identified, a lot of work was put into identifying areas that could be developed and areas that can't be developed, either through the environmental reserve or through the urban reserve classifications. So what that means basically is that we've got lands that somebody at some point, as we evaluated them and took a look at them, said, we can put some development here. We don't know what that form will take later, but right now that there will be some development at some point in the future. And that point is kind of coming to about now. And we have to contemplate what that's going to look like. Could it be reverted to open space or green space? It could be if the landowner themselves wanted to apply and make that request. But it sounds like in this circumstance, the landowner is seeking to develop on it, but there's a component of it that will be converted into open space as well. So those are the challenges that we have to look at, and we'll take a look at as the application goes back and then gets reconsidered and then brought back forward to us. The comments that we've been hearing from the community are helpful because the applicant has heard those as well. Questions around buffering and scale and adjacency. I think there's some things that as we take a look at in terms of traffic studies and things like that, those have been done. Those seem to be generally satisfied. The environmental impacts and the interface, those need to be assured and addressed, and that was done through the environmental impact study. There's still some questions about what form this will take, and that's what we'll be hearing when it comes back to us. It sounds like we'll likely be referring this back so that there can be more work with the community to be able to come up with its final form. I say all this just because I want to temper some expectations. In all likelihood, something will be developed on this site. The question is what form that takes and whether that reflects all of the planning documents that we have in place and the wishes of the applicant and the wishes of the community all trying to come together. So that's our challenge. I'm intrigued to see what changes come forward with the next iteration. But at this point, I'll wait before making any further comments. But those were the ones I wanted to get out of the way right now because I think they're important as it's referred back to staff.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. So just two questions. One is about the overall situation of vehicle traffic along the road. It's been raised by a number of residents. Obviously, this is a site that, in addition to the people who live in the area, there's a major destination in the form of the ESA. And I wonder if somebody on city staff, perhaps someone from transportation, can give a sense of what is the loading that's on the road now, not just from the residents, but from the visitors to the ESA on an average day. Because I know the incremental additional peak load that's being suggested is one thing, but this is not a sort of normal local street that's accommodating a normal amount of local traffic. It's a specific street that leads to a major destination. So I wonder if we could just get a sense of what the current conditions are.
I'll go to staff on that.
Madam Chair, it's Garfield Dales from Transportation. Through you, just to respond. So we've heard about the some of the parking activity, and obviously with the ESA and the park trails in the area, it does attract traffic, particularly on the weekends, as I understand. But overall, this is a low volume roadway with only a small number of residential properties, relatively, as I said, low volume to the point where we wouldn't typically even perform traffic counts on this type of roadway. So with the development, obviously, is part of the review of the traffic generated, within the capacity of a two-lane roadway like this, the incremental traffic wouldn't be considered to be significant, and obviously within the ability of this roadway to carry that type of traffic loading.
Just a very brief comment through the chair to staff. If there's any ability to collect information about the current conditions, I think it would be wise. I mean, I recognize that during a pandemic that has increased a lot of park usage, it might not be the best time to be sampling how busy the roadways are, but I do think that this is a road that has a fair amount of unusual activity. It's not a local road the same way a lot of other local roads are. And if there is time, if there is a referral, in fact, if there's any way to capture some of that, I think it would be helpful for the future discussion. I wanted to ask about the overall parcel, which is 5.2 hectares, and how much under the current proposal is being allocated to open space. So of the 5.2 hectares, a lot of it is expressed as, there's will be a buffer over here and there'll be a buffer there. What is the land area that's going to be going into open space as a proportion of the total site?
Do you have that, Mr. Corby?
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe it's roughly around 2 hectares in size. I think the development limit's about 3.2 hectares in size.
So about 40%, give or take?
Roughly, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I do support a referral because I think it's helpful for the community to see precisely what the developer is proposing. It does seem to me like the major thing that is up for discussion is not really that there's going to be some development on the site, but exactly where it's going to be, how much development there would be, and where exactly it would be located, especially the easterly setback from the road. And I'm glad that members of the public raised the referral, having Latch take a look at it, because although it's still not been answered, and I'll see if I can track down the answer, the whole approach into the ESA is, like I said, it's not just unusual for having a lot of cars parked on it. It's also got its own cultural heritage value, whether it's been designated or not. And I think making sure that the development is sensitive to that is important in terms of its longer term success. I know that this is an area that a lot of people really like traveling to. It's one of these wonderful environmental areas in the City of London. We have many of them, and this is one of the best. I know a lot of people drive to get to the place where they want to walk. And some people want to live closer so they can just walk and not have the driving part. And I think that's what we're trying to balance is, the development potential on that site, making sure that it's not causing any problems with the natural heritage system. I think in terms of the westerly buffer in particular, that the applicant and city staff have done a really good job to try and make sure that that is as far back as possible from the natural area to keep it consistent and workable. I think it's closer to the road that is the issue. And I look forward to discussing it again when it comes back. I'm happy to move the referral so we can have it to come back at a future meeting of planning.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Turner, did you have another comment, or are you seconding? Seconding. Okay. Councillor Hopkins, do you have a comment?
Yes, I'm happy to support the deferral back, and I want to thank the community for coming out and expressing your thoughts and concerns, and especially as it relates to the ESA. And we have a number of ESAs in the City of London with development very close to it. I know that is one of the challenges I face in my ward is how do you balance growth with right up against an ESA. I do have a quick question through you, Madam Chair, to staff. And it sort of came from the community, and it is mentioned in our report as well about the trees in the ESA and the sight lines that will be needed, the trimming of the trees. But it's also mentioned that we will be taking down trees in the ESA. And I just want to confirm that I understand that correctly through you to whoever.
Mr. Corby, is that you?
Through you, Madam Chairs. Sorry, where does it say that it will be removing trees from the ESA?
It was mentioned through the public comments as well, but I thought I also came across it too, and I can't pinpoint it, but I'll double check that. But the community made that comment, and I wanted to make sure that we understand about the trees, the trimming for the sight lines that will be needed. And I guess that comes back to that buffering that I have sort of a question mark around the buffering on that east side. So do we normally take down trees in ESAs?
So in regards to, I think the public comment were concerns about the lands to the west and then the north, losing trees from those environmentally significant features. Obviously, we have appropriate buffering. No trees will be removed from that. And as part of the application, obviously, no trees were planned to be removed from the ESA to the east. That was something that came out of circulation through staff that we might have to look at trimming trees or removing trees. That the extent of that obviously hasn't been undertaken. And it's not ideal, I don't think, but to ensure safe sight lines, it might be required. But obviously city staff is not going to want to remove more trees than they have to from the ESA on the east side.
Yeah, thank you for that, because that's the challenge as we develop in these environmentally significant areas, how we protect the nature and how we develop it. It's something that I'm very sensitive to, and how we balance that is what I'm looking forward to we go through this public participation meeting again with comments, seeing the revised site plan. I'm looking forward to that. And also undertaking, I noticed some of the comments coming from UTRCA about the lack of details relating to the outlet locations. And I know that's thrown into site plan, but it's also something that is really important and to further understand, as we know something will be developed here, how it's going to look like and how it's going to work. For me, it is important. So I'm hoping with the report coming back, we can get some further details, understanding not only with the buffering along the road, but also how it's all going to work as we move forward with this application. So with that, I'm happy to support the deferral back.
Any other comments? Oh, okay. I'm not seeing any, so we have a motion on the floor. The clerk will read the motion.
The consideration of the application by 2690015 Ontario Inc. relating to the property located at 101 Meadow Lily Road South be referred back to the Civic Administration to continue to work with the applicant and to report back at a future public participation meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee to allow the applicant to further refine the plan.
Okay, so that is the motion, and I see no more comments, so I'll call the vote. Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Okay, so that will come back to a future meeting of the Planning and Environment Committee, and it will be a public participation meeting, and we'll have a better idea of the application at that point, and we'll have a whole new discussion then. So thank you again to the members of the public for coming out, and I think this is a good opportunity for the applicant and city staff to have I know there has been a community meeting, but this is another opportunity to hear from the public. So we'll move along and we'll go back to the consent items. We have 2.1 and 2.2. Would you like to deal with those separately, committee, or we could move them both together and you can comment as you like? I'm not seeing any desire to pull those and have them separate. So do I have a motion to put the consent items on the floor? Moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Any comments? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to speak with respect to the environmental management guidelines updates, looking forward to having this circulated for comment and discussion. There's been a significant amount of comments so far, as noted in the report here on the appendix. Over 150 comments from the Environmental and Ecological Planning Advisory Committee alone. I'd like to just make note of that right now and thank them for an amazing amount of work to go through this with basically a fine-tooth comb and provide that input and advice. The Upper Thames, the London Development Institute, the Urban League of London, all providing a significant input into this as well. Those are really important comments to us. One of the questions when I first saw the item on the agenda that I had in my own head was, where's everybody at on this? And this table at the Appendix E, it gives us a really good sense of where everybody's at on this. I was wondering if this would be a straightforward process or if it was going to encounter some hurdles along the way. I think we've got a bit of a sense of where that might be going. If I might, through you, Madam Chair, just a question about the process from here going forward. This is a guidance document. It's referred to in the OP, but in its own right, it has some pretty strong implications in policy and how we enact development. What can we expect going forward as we move through this process, and if we face ourselves in a position of lengthy appeals to something like this, or if that's even an ability that could be put forward. I think they're an important. This is an important document, an important framework. Some of the comments in here are rather telling about where some challenges might lie with the document itself. So I guess I just want to get a sense or a flavor of what we can expect over the coming future of this document.
Okay, I'll go to city staff for that.
Through you, Madam Chair, it's Greg Barrett speaking.
Go ahead, Mr. Barrett.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Turner. The final step of this, after we go through the refinement and the consultation on what the guidelines themselves actually say, we'll be coming back to you with recommendation that the guidelines be adopted as a guideline document under the official plan. So that part is appealable. In other words, somebody could appeal the guidelines being adopted as a guideline document. The contents of the document itself would be, I guess, the reason why they would appeal, and that's what we would be addressing. But with respect to the policies themselves are shielded because we're not amending the policies. We would be adopting this under the guideline adopting policies of the official plan. And so you have direction in the official plan that says that council shall prepare guidelines to assist in many things. We have guidelines to help us understand, for example, how we develop within heritage conservation districts. We adopt those guidelines and they're applied in the consideration. So in the same way, these guidelines are intended to help us implement the policies of the official plan. And so the guidelines are actually broken down that way, and they actually have their chapters are aligned with essentially policy statements or policy groups of policies within the official plan. So for example, the first or the second chapter of the guideline document itself speaks to, sorry, and I'm just trying to get there on the actual table of contents. The first chapter actually speaks to how to undertake an EIS. And so that's a very important piece of the whole planning application process. And you've heard talk about an EIS in tonight's application. The next guideline talks about the evaluation of the significance of significance and ecological function. So the actual policies around the different components of the natural heritage system are the policies of the official plan. This tells you how you, in fact, look at determining the significance of those features. The next set of guidelines are around boundary delineation, and that tells you how to, in fact, define the edge or the boundary of those different natural heritage features. Then, as again was referred to this evening, there's a set of guidelines as it relates to buffers and how you would actually determine a buffer adjacent to any of those identified components of the natural heritage system. And then the last two chapters are around ecological compensation and monitoring, which is after the fact or as you are doing this evaluation, what compensation may be required, and after the fact, what monitoring is required. So the guidelines quite simply tell you how we will implement those policies, and the guidelines themselves could be subject to an appeal as part of that adopting process to adopt them as a guideline document.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. It's helpful. So it could go on for a little while, but in the meantime, the environmental management guidelines that we have in place are in force and effect. These are changes that are being proposed in the meantime. I was wondering if there might be some comment from staff as to what the substantive changes are in the document in this version as opposed to the existing version, and if, as this is going out to consultation, if those get identified for the public as they consume these two.
Mr. Barrett.
Thank you. Through the chair. It's hard to put a finger on what the most substantive changes, I guess, are, other than organization, clarity, and and currency. One of the big things on this was to ensure that we're using the best available knowledge for the determination of what we would use as the direction within these guidelines. And that's one of the great advantages of the process that we've undertaken to date that you've noted, and the comments that were received. These guidelines are coming forward, in fact, reflecting the input that was received before we even put pen to paper to develop them. And that whole process started by looking at our current guidelines and saying, what's working in these, what's not working in these, what needs to be updated, where are we running into issues of not fully reflecting the most current science. So that's what this focus has been on, has been ensuring that we reflect the most current science, make sure we reflect any of the deficiencies that had been identified in the previous guidelines, and putting them in a way that would make them more usable, more understandable for the practitioners in the field. Our consultants on this are well-known consultants who've a lot of experience in working in the City of London within our policy regime, and have experience working both for city projects and for privately led projects. So have a really good understanding as to how these guidelines are best used and could be best used through this update. So I think that certainly it's not going to be a smooth process when you're bringing something this major forward. But I think given the input that's gone in to date, and given that they started from that understanding of what we need to fix, what's already working and we don't need to fix, and the understanding that we want to make the most current guidelines possible, I think is going to move us a long way to getting them through the process.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's the hard part for me to read it and get a sense of what's changed. At a glance, I can see that there aren't big changes, like buffers didn't double or get halved, anything like that. Those would be the kind of the first things I look for in this, and how to apply the patch sizes and what the impacts of those are. And it's really hard because this document is organized completely differently than the existing EMGs to do a red line amendments so that you can say, okay, well, this changed here and this changed here. So it's kind of hard to follow the bouncing ball. I think that's the challenge as a consumer of this. The main stakeholders that are going to be involved in this have been consulted at the outset, so that's helpful. And they've done a pretty close and thorough read of this. And as you said, Mr. Barrett, they have been giving input and feedback all the way along. So that's been even before the outset of this project. I think that's what would be helpful for me when it comes back to us, is to know where major changes occurred and what the potential impact is that for us. I see there's a table in here that has kind of a net effects table. But having that broader sense so that we know, are we changing our environmental position? Are we moving forward, or are we just kind of holding water? So those kind of things. The final question I had was one around species at risk. The province made moves recently to change how we consider species at risk tables and the provincial designation of species at risk compared to the kind of the federal designations. Is the municipality able to apply a greater standard to species at risk than what the province has identified? As this makes a lot of reference to that process.
Again, through the chair, actually, that's one of the things that's actually noted in the buffer determination on the habitats of threatened and endangered species, where it actually talks about that those would be reasons where, in fact, you might go beyond maximum buffer recommendations that are laid out. So, and that is one change, if I could note, that actually is different in this document from the current one, in that in the whole buffer section, it starts actually with establishing both a minimum and a maximum buffer. So it in fact starts by telling you what a minimum appropriate buffer would be, and then it gives conditions as to how you would look to build on that minimum. And it talks about what either the nature of the development is, what the nature of the feature is, And it also makes reference to vulnerable, threatened, and endangered species. So all of those considerations would be in there as to a means and a reason why a buffer recommendation may be greater than what's actually identified in the maximum table.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you very much for the report. Just, I think it's, there's a lot to take in, and I appreciate Councillor Turner's comments about wanting to know what has changed. And I think it's very easy when you read these reports, being on the committee, you're kind of looking to see what is important to you or what's not important, or you're just trying to have a better sense of what's going on. And I would like to thank First Nations and also to the external groups that were consulted and giving comment, and looking forward to further comments coming back from them. But as I was looking at what has changed, one of the things that did stand out to me was the monitoring process and how we are going to move forward with that. But as I read the comments, I started to get more questions about how it would work or how the EIS would inform that monitoring process. So I think there's a bit more work to be done, and looking forward to sort of seeing how that eventually the guidelines will come back. I do have a quick question through you, Madam Chair. Plantations, that kind of stood out to me. I've got a plantation in my ward, and just through you to staff, is that a change, or is that going to be changed? Are we looking at how we look at plantations, and just wanted to have a better understanding through you to staff, or is it something that is still to come?
Mr. Barrett?
So I was looking for my unmute button. Sorry, through you, Madam Chair. I'm not even going to try to make a guess at that one, because I'm not familiar with all of those sections in the report, but it's I can find out for you and get back to the councillor. But I do want to leave, though, the committee with I think a little bit of a level of comfort. These are guidelines that actually help us implement our policies. As I said at the outset, we're not amending our policies, our natural heritage policies, those natural heritage features that we think are important, and the criteria that we have in the official plan that we use to identify their significance are not changed and not proposed to be changed for these guidelines. These guidelines tell practitioners, using the best available data and the best available science, as to how you make those determinations. So I want to leave you with that level of comfort where, yes, there are going to be significant changes, but those changes are in the how we do it, not in the why we're doing it or what it is that we're trying to protect. Those policies are not changed. Those are the guiding policies that direct these guidelines for us. But one of the other things that we're also looking for in this is consistency in the reporting. And the councillor noted the monitoring section. That is new, because that is something, and this committee is a committee that hears this a lot of times when they are dealing with applications within or adjacent to natural areas, about the importance of knowing, is the EIS working? Are the recommendations of the EIS working? And so this talks about that monitoring process that would become part of this whole evaluation and how we actually go forward in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. I appreciate that. And just one final question, I guess, getting back to what you said about how we do it. And, you know, we've talked about climate change, a changing climate. Is that taken into consideration as well through this process?
Mr. Barrett?
Sorry, I pushed the button the wrong way. Through you, Madam Chair, the specifics, again, in this are not climate change specifics. They are ecological function and ecological feature specific. But in as much as these natural heritage areas are important elements that help mitigate the impacts of climate change. That's still why we look to preserve these things. But with respect to explicit climate change criteria as evaluation criteria on their ecological significance, I have to speak to the ecologists who've been looking at this. Nothing comes to mind from my read of it directly, but I could be mistaken, and I'll follow up on that.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Thanks, Councillor. Any other comments on the consent items? Councillor Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Thank you. Just on the building permit report, not a question, but just a comment. Really tremendous growth on the residential side. I know that Mr. Kokoros gave us a bit of a preview at our last meeting, saying that August numbers were quite significant, but it's a 20% increase in the number of units in the middle of a pandemic, and that's on a base year. Last year was a very big year in terms of growth and construction activity, so it's not a small number to be higher than. And when you look at the higher density units, it's more like 50% increase from August to August year over year. And the backlog, the pipeline of activity that's sort of waiting for permits and is ready to go is also in the neighborhood of 100% higher than it was last year. So I don't want to read too much into that, but I do think we need to take away from this report that the demand for residential housing in London of all different kinds, especially higher density housing, and even the single family is increasing pretty substantially. Is very, very strong, even in the middle of a worldwide pandemic that has crippled the economy. And I know that doesn't happen just by accident. The folks who are building all these buildings are making that happen, and so our city staff who are facilitating and doing all the inspections and making sure everything is on point and safe. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's working on that. It's one area of the economy that is really booming here in London.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'm glad you mentioned that, because if you didn't, I was going to. And keep in mind as well that there was about a 6-week halt in residential construction at the start of the declaration of the state of emergency. So the fact that developers have come right back at it, and our staff being able to basically accommodate the same kind of growth that we've seen in past years, but with fewer weeks to do the work. And all, as you said, practicing that physical distancing and staying safe. I think that is very laudable, and we should be very proud. Any other comments or questions from committee on the consent items? Seeing none, I have a mover and a seconder. So I will call the vote. Councillor Kayabaga.
Yes.
Councillor Turner.
Yes.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Helmer.
Yes.
Mayor Holder.
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
I have nothing else on our agenda. I'm not seeing any additional business from anyone else, so I will look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Turner, and we can do a show of hands. All those in favor? I see Councillor Kayabaga has her hand up as well, so that's unanimous. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody from staff that's on the call. Have a great night.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Ciao.